I was a Franconia officer prior to this. When they heard that a Franconia officer had been shot and was dead, the assumption was, let's see if it was Brad. And in attempting to call, they couldn't get me at home because I was in Russia. And so they really flew off the handle. They called state police in Concord, they called Grafton Sheriff's Department, and finally had explained to them that no, it wasn't Brad Whipple, he wasn't anywhere around. When I got back the following day and heard what had occurred, I called a criminal lawyer in Concord and said, what the hell's going on? Are you going to get involved in this case? I've heard some terrible stories about what's going on, and it needs to be investigated quickly by somebody who's good. And that was Mr. Sisti, whom I respect a great deal, and asked for his help. And he said, well, what do you know about it? And I talked to him for maybe 15 minutes on the phone, and he said, I'm sending a private detective up to talk to you tomorrow. That private detective came up, talked to me for a while, then hired me to work for him. And together, the two of us put in the next year of just gathering all the complaints we possibly could dig up, verbal, recording them, and everything else. And
against Bruce McKay, you're saying?
Against Bruce McKay, elements that had stayed secret pretty much for the general public, because these were reports that were filed with the Chief of Police, with the Board of Selectmen, with Kelly Ayotte, the Attorney General. And the amazing thing was, nothing seemed to have been done. In my eyes, and I'm jumping over a big fence at this point, I think that there are several people who are culpable of malfeasance, not completing their duty in the way they should have, because with the information they had about this guy, they had to say, get him out of uniform, get him out of the service. He doesn't belong in it. 5 years, almost to the day before the shooting occurred, I had met with his superior in the Franconia Police Department, which I once worked for, and I said, get rid of this guy. He's a danger to your community and to your department. And that was my feeling then, based on my work in law enforcement, 22 years. I had been an Air Force intelligence officer back in the Cold War in the 50s. So my background was to try to be analytical and understand what goes on, observe, and then not just keep my mouth shut, but to talk about it. So when asked by the private investigator to join him, I did it with a passion. I knew that he was a police officer who did wrong, in my eyes, from what I kept hearing day after day after day. And that did not bode well for those officers who would stand beside him and say, one of ours fell. He definitely was not one of ours. And I think if all the facts are out, when they are all out, and if they had been allowed to be out by the Attorney General at the time, I think a lot of people would have fallen to the other side of the opinion poll and known McKay for what he was. Number one, minor thing, maybe nobody will pick up on it, but he had a violence charge filed by his wife.
It's in the book. It's mentioned, yeah.
Theoretically, if you have a violence charge and you get a court order against somebody, they're not allowed to carry a weapon, which ipso facto says you're no longer a police officer. Why that wasn't followed up on, I don't know.
Well, they somehow, when I sent my request for production of documents and in the lawsuits, they somehow misplaced the rest of that file, and the courts can't seem to...
Misplaced a lot of things.
Yeah, right.
My feeling was that every level where action should have been taken, it was not. From the police chief to the Board of Selectmen to the Attorney General.